Shalom, shalom, y'all. Yerd Yao. Theory of Everything 20, the calendar. All right, let's get right into it. Genesis chapter 1, around verse 12 or 13. You guys check my address. The fourth day, Yah created the sun, stars, moon, in order to give light upon the earth and for signs and seasons. So I really wanted to get into the calendar with this theory of everything, because this is the season for Passover. This is the beginning of the year. And we have to understand how to use this calendar, because there's a lot of confusion that's out there about the calendar. So let's clear it up as best we can. And this is not an exact science necessarily, because we are very far removed from the culture. But with, Yah's help, doing a little bit of research and sticking with it, we'll get there. Genesis 1, the sun, moon, and stars are your clock in the sky. No way around it. You are not looking at light years of space and time. You're looking at a clock. And if you stop and do the research and, look at your Bible and see how these objects in the sky are used, then you recognize it for what it is: the most accurate timekeeping piece, technological marvel, wonder that could ever be created. Right now it's overcast, so we can't really look at anything. And then, of course, the stars will be out later, but it'll be overcast tonight as well. So we won't be able to look at any sun or moon tonight. Any moon tonight. But the sun itself is used to count years and days. The book of Enoch tells us that the sun has 364 days, and that the year starts with the sun rising in its equinox position, right? And we know the equinox position is when it's dead center in the sky, rising completely in the center, which is the equal day, equal night. You'll check this by looking at your horizon, where the sun rises to the east, and mark a center point, and you'll be able to, if you have a horizon like mine, where there's different, landmarks in the horizon, you can mark where the sun rises, every day, and you'll be able to see it rising in a different position as it moves further to either side of that middle point. So when it comes up, the book of Enoch calls these portals, right? So it rises in this portal during this time of year, it rises in this portal during this time of year, and this is how it traverses the earth. And so we have to pay attention, because that center point, Enoch says, is the beginning of the year. And there'll be two center points. There'll be one in the spring for the spring, and then there'll be one for the winter. So you have to know exactly which center point it's talking about. So it gives you a star constellation to double check. If you don't know which part of the year you're in, check it by the star, right? So already you're using the sun and the stars to start your year, right? And that's the way that you do it. And so when you start your year, you have the right point to start your clock, right? And so the first piece of the Hebrew calendar is the sun. It marks your years and your days. So there's 364 days in the sun, and then also 24 hours for it to traverse the face of the planet. Okay, so now the next timekeeping piece is the lesser light, but a very, 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 very important timekeeping piece for Israel, because the moon is when we mark all of our feast days, save one, Shabbat, right? So you have to understand that the moon is a timekeeping piece too, that it doesn't have 364 days like the sun. It has 354 days, which makes it a faster timekeeping piece than the sun, which is what you need. When you look at the face of your clock, you see the numbers on the outside, but you see the hands, 1 hour hand moving slow, and the minute hand moving fast, right? That's how you keep the most accurate time, by having two indicators, right? If you just have one indicator, then you're going to have one set of time, one set of coordinates. No, you've got two. And what's very interesting about this second indicator, the moon, is that it also has a cycle within itself, to add to that circular cycle, right? It has 354 days in a lunar year, quote unquote year. But it also has 28 days and 29 days cycling in its cycle, right? So you start with a new moon, right, which is a sliver. It's not a full moon, it's not a new moon. A sliver is a new moon because you're just filling that moon up, right, according to the book of Enoch. And then you build until you get to the 2-week mark, the middle of the month, 14 days, full moon, 14th day, full moon. All right, we haven't gotten there yet. And then you get to the end where you get the black moon the next 14 days, right? And so it itself is its own cycle that adds an extra element of timekeeping to your calendrical understanding, right? The moon. It's a huge element in Hebrew understanding. Please don't throw away the moon because of Jasher, right? Is it Jasher or Jubilees that says the 10-day separation starting the year? You guys tell me which one it is. But don't throw that moon away because of that text where it says don't start the year with your moon. We'll go into that in a moment too. Third timekeeping device that the Bible talks about is the stars, right? If you go to the book of Psalms, chapter 19, the firmament showeth the handiwork of Yah, and the stars. Forgive me if I'm messing up this text, but it talks about the stars having a story until the end of time, right? What story does the stars have that goes into the end of time? Well, again, a calendar goes to the end of time, right? That's what a calendar is for, to mark time. So when you have the stars as a third accurate timekeeping piece, then you have a sun and a moon and a backdrop of constellations. Just so happens to be 12 constellations, right? That Hebrews, recognize and utilize. And whether we can identify these same constellations, current and ancient, it's up for grabs. But we know that that's what they're there for, right? To mark where the position is in the sky so that you know that you're in the right time of year. It's the numbers on the back of the clock face, right? That also rotate as well. So you've got 3 timekeeping pieces. One that rotates on a yearly and a daily cycle. The next that rotates on a yearly and a nightly cycle and its own 28-day count. And then another that does a yearly cycle with 12 additional points of, way more than 12. Of course, you've got the whole sky full of stars, but using the constellation as your markers in the sky that spin around and coordinate as well. An expert technological marvels in the sky for the entire earth to see, right? And not just Hebrews, everyone. Everyone can look at the sky and use this marvel of Yah's genius in order to worship him, right? That's what it's there for, right? And so how do we use it? How do we use it? That's before we go into how to use the calendar. Let's discuss what we already have and what we were raised with. So in Christian history, there hasn't always been a consensus on how to keep Christian holidays. The reason why we keep Christian holidays and have a calendar to keep these Christian holidays on is because of the Catholic Church, right? It's because of the Catholic Church. And of course they incorporated all their pagan holy days into this calendar as well, but it didn't start overnight, it took some time, right? We know the religion of Christianity really began in 300 AD with Constantine. And then from then on, you've got a succession of popes, right? And so you get to Pope Gregory around the 7th or 8th century AD, a few hundred years later, and he's trying to codify their, holiday structure, So he comes up with the Gregorian calendar. And what the Gregorian calendar actually does is it handicaps you as to the clock, the calendar that's in the sky. What you have with the Gregorian calendar is a false sun with a 365-day count and a false moon. What, Jeremiah? Oh, okay. Go ahead and get back busy. I'll be done in a minute. So you have a false 365-day sun count, and you also have a false moon count with the 12 months of the year, right? Have you noticed 12 months of the year? Months. So what is a month, right? A month is a created thing that really does not exist anywhere but in the Gregorian calendar. Now we know we have, names of what they call months in the ancient Hebrew, Abib, Nisan, and all of these other things, right? But what no one really takes the time to recognize is that these aren't names of a fictional 30-day set of time that you're, accompanying into a 365-day count. These are actually moons, right? So we look at January, February, March as these time structures that comprise a year that are called months. In reality, they're false moons because the moon is the month. Even the word month looks like moon because that's what it is. Month is false moon, right? And so your moon has 28 days and 29 days, and it interchanges month by month, right? And so the Gregorian calendar does its best to falsely depict that cycle and give you these 12 months to in place, right? In place of that lunar cycle. And so you have a problem as well, because you want to take that Gregorian calendar and kind of shove a Hebrew understanding inside of it. And it doesn't necessarily work that way, because the Gregorian calendar is actually a single version of 3 different calendars. It's not even one calendar, it's 3. And people don't necessarily understand how, it can be 3 pieces of time in one. But when you look at, the way that the sun, moon, and stars work, then you're also looking at the way that you have to have a calendar set up, even if it's a false one, right? And so the third timekeeping piece in the Gregorian calendar, of course, is the 7-day count. And we can get into that in a minute as well, because the 7-day count is not a part of the sky calendar that Yah gave to us. It's a count that started before the sky calendar was created. It's its own count that Yah gives you. You can't find it with the sky. Yah gives it to you. Okay, so the Gregorian calendar is a compilation, an amalgamation of 3 different calendars: the solar calendar, the lunar calendar, and the Shabbat calendar, because it counts 7s too: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's what the Gregorian calendar does, right? And so since we use this calendar and it comprises our everyday lives, we use it lived, but in our feast day cycle, we can't really depend on it. We have to depend on the sky, and then it gets a little bit sticky putting it where the days go, right? That's where people have their issues. So the next component that I want to get into with the calendar is actually keeping the feast days. So you have to go to Leviticus 23. Everybody knows Leviticus 23 is where you get your feast day calendar, or it tells you how to keep the feast. And what's the first feast that it tells you to keep? The Shabbat day. 6 days shall you work. On the 7th day be your rest unto Yahuwah, or unto Yah, I'm sorry, because he rested on that day right after his creation. So that day does not have an address there in Leviticus 23. It doesn't have a solar address. It doesn't have a lunar address. It doesn't have anything. It just says the 7th day. So that tells you automatically that you can never find the Sabbath by using the moon. You can never find the Sabbath unless you count the day with the sun. This count, when it starts, is before you existed, before the sun, moon, and stars existed. When that count started, there was no sun, moon, and stars. In fact, the light of the earth was not the sun, it was Yah, right? It was Yah's light through Yahusha, right? It wasn't the sun. So you can't use the sun to find when that Shabbat starts. And the proof is right there in Leviticus 23. It doesn't give you a solar lunar address. It doesn't do any of that, right? So automatically, we know that the Shabbat is something that's given to us, something that we have to ask for, right? And, we've been blessed that this era, we are not in the dark about the Sabbath. We know that the Sabbath that we keep today, that everybody calls Saturday, is the actual Sabbath, is the actual ancient Sabbath going back to the 1st century. We know that for a fact. We know that for a fact because, thank Yah, this is kind of a blessing and a curse kind of deal. Yah knew, of course, that we were going to go into captivity. Of course, the prophecy of the Messiah is that you'll be scattered throughout all nations and there will be havoc on this people, right? We know in Luke 21. And so that comes to pass, right? We know that comes to pass. So what happens to the information? What happens to, all of the people, the Levites that were watching the moon every month? What happens to the count keepers and the calendar studiers, right? The sky studies. What happens to all that? It goes away. It vanishes with the kingdom going into captivity. So that information is passed on and taken, at this point to the Romans. And the Romans use it and develop, the Roman Catholic Church. But again, hallelujah, that they didn't destroy the information because they continued to keep that same count. And we know that there are Hebrews that, were scattered to the four corners that were also still keeping the same Sabbath because they talk about it, right? Justin Martyr in the 1st century. Is he in the 1st century or 2nd century? He's either late 1st century or early 2nd century, but still a very, very early Christian witness, right? Within 100 years of Messiah. He says that, the Hebrews are cursed to keep this 7-day count. We Christians keep the 8th day. That would be Sunday, right? And from there, you have a steady line of 8-day keepers, right? The people that keep Sunday instead of Saturday. You have a steady line going all the way up to Constantine, and then in Constantine's Roman Empire, all the way going up until the advent of the Muslim faith, the Islamic faith, where they also become a secondary not time-keeping piece, but recorder of Hebrews that were keeping the 7th day around them, of Christians that were keeping Sunday, the 1st day, around them. So you have a steady stream of written information all the way through every captivity that we've had back to the Messiah, so that without a doubt that we're keeping the right day. And then people will say, what about when the Gregorian calendar was changed in the 1500s? Yeah, that did happen. But you got to do the additional step too. Because the Gregorian calendar is, again, 3 different calendars. And only one aspect of the calendar was changed. And that was that particular lunar aspect, right? Which is the months. The 7-day didn't change. The 365 didn't change. You just, on Tuesday, it was March 17th, let's just say. And then on Wednesday, it was April 17th. So they added, I don't think it was an actual 30-day that they added. It was a little bit more. But they jumped from Tuesday to a Wednesday, and it would have been a certain amount of days. You'll go from March 17th to April 20th or whatever. But that's how they did it. They didn't change the 7-day count. They continued it. And if they didn't, we would know it because there's a secondary record in the Muslim faith because they kept record too. So Yah is not slack. He's not slack. He knows what he's doing, right? He knows we're going into captivity and we had the potential to lose the Sabbath. Therefore, he has 2 religions to back it up, to let you know in the future when you get ready, as a people to come back together and start keeping the Sabbath when it is, right? That's what he also did with the Hebrew language. He had a foolish nation take hold of it until you were ready for it. And then even gave you the little training wheels to learn it with, the Nakud vowel pointing system. Even though that's false as well, you get to learn every sound that Hebrews have ever made with that vowel pointing system. And then you figure out where the sounds go once you learn it, right? You learn it, you understand it, you take the training wheels off, right? So that's what we do here as well with the Gregorian calendar. We discard that because we know that, that's just what the world uses to keep time. We have the sun, moon, and stars to keep the sky by, right? And I guess we were talking about the Sabbath day and how we can, be sure that that was the ancient Sabbath day that we're keeping now. And we can be absolutely sure that that's what it is. And we can be sure of that without the sun, moon, and stars. You can never find it with the sun, moon, and stars. Leviticus 23 being the proof of that, because it doesn't give you an address and where to keep it, right? Okay, that being said, let's go to the next one. The next one, of course, is the slaying of the Passover. And you got to get this, because this is where people are thrown, right? The direction is that you are to, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at even, you are to slay your Passover, right? And we know it says you should not slay them in all the places that you see or in all your gates, and we don't. We hold a memorial meal. We don't slaughter it necessarily. We used to, but we don't anymore. So let's get that out of the way. But it says on the 14th day of the month, of the first month of the year, don't forget, at even, you slaughter your Passover. Okay, so how do you know, again, the first month of the year? What is a month, right? We talked about there being no such thing as a month, right? So what is this verse talking about then for this month? Well, we talked about how the translators sometimes try to throw you off when it comes to this calendar. Talked about how season was a huge amount of time, and moed in Genesis, moedim, and when it says, the sun and stars and moon are used for signs and seasons. That word season is actually moed, which is an appointed time, a single day, not a season, which is usually 3 months, 90 days, right? So that's a huge difference. Just like that huge difference, the word month in Leviticus 23 is not month. That's not what that word means. It's the word chodesh, right? Chet, dalet, shin, chodesh, right? Chodesh is the same word for chadash, right? Like Brit Hadashah. What is the Brit Hadashah? It's the New Testament, right? So Brit means testament or covenant. Hadashah means new or renewed, right? Because we know that the covenant is not necessarily a new covenant, it's a renewed covenant, right? And so just like a covenant can renew, there is something in the sky that renews every month, right? So that's our moon. We have a moon that's doing all of this oscillating in the sky for a purpose, for us to see and mark time, right? And so when we look at what the scripture actually says, it says that you will keep your Passover, you will slaughter your Passover lamb on the first new of the year, on the 14th day of that new, right? So when it says Chodesh, it means new. And so you're looking at a word that doesn't mean moon or month. You're looking at a word that means new. But you gotta understand that Hebrew is a lived language, that the Bible is written in Hebrew, that it's the living word, and it's lived. It's not a static, book all to itself. It's lived. People live from this book, right? So they don't necessarily explain everything that's understood. Like where to start your year, the Bible doesn't tell you that. The book of Enoch does. Similarly, the writers of the Bible, right? Moses here in Leviticus didn't feel the need to tell you that the new is the new moon. Because in Hebrew culture, they all know that. They go upstairs. They go upstairs. I'm sorry, my sons are coming upstairs. This is what I'm listening to them. They go up on their roof, and when they mark the sky and they search for the new, they're looking for the thing in the sky that becomes new every month, which is the new moon. So the command is that the first new of the year, on the 14th day of that new, you slaughter your Passover. So right there, you're looking at sun and moon in your sky address, right? The first moon of the year, right? The first new moon of the year. So by doing that, you have to know when the new year is and when that first moon comes. So here's the thing with the Gregorian calendar. The new year in the Gregorian calendar is what? January 1st, right? The new month, the first month of the year, is also January 1st, right? Easy peasy, Is that how Yah's calendar works? Is that how the Hebrew calendar works when you look up at the sky? Is it that cookie cutter easy? It's not, right? I had a buddy who we would talk about this for years, kind of on and off for years, right? So he couldn't get that you didn't have to have the start of the new month with the start of the year. He wasn't getting that these are two calendrical systems coming together in the Gregorian calendar, and that in lived reality, it doesn't work that way, right? It doesn't work that way. So let me explain. We again found the new year in the book of Enoch as the equinox, right? And the equinox is usually March 20, March 19, somewhere around that time. So let's just say that your last new moon was on the 1st of March. Let's just make up a, fabricated year where the new moon was on March 1st, right? The last new moon. And so how many days does the moon have? 28 or 29. So during that moon, you're going to cross into the new year because you're going to cross March 20th, right? So when you look up on March 21st or March 22nd, when you go looking for your moon, you're going to find that it's going to be it's going to be a half moon going out into a black moon, right? Because you got 1 week left of that particular moon for the last moon of last year, right? And so when the new moon comes in that year, it'll be around March, and this is a fabricated year, we're not talking about this year. It'll be around March 28th or 29th, because we know that either the last moon will have either 28 or 29 days, depending on that particular cycle, what day of the cycle it was, or what moon of the cycle it was. And you'll be able to see that the new moon will come in on around the 30th or the 31st. That first, after your black moon, that first new moon will come in with the sliver around that time. Scripture says that's when you start your count. You don't count from the equinox. So the problem that a lot of people are having is they're counting from the equinox every year. And let me explain why that's a problem with the clock. Because you're literally starting over every year. Does that make sense? What the moon does, having a shorter amount of days, a speedier time around the face of the earth, is it acts as a long count, right? So your position of the moon, your cycle of the moon, when the sun rises on that equinox, will tell you the long count, right? So plus 10, plus 10, plus 10 every year. If you know where the moon's supposed to be, you'll know where your 7s are. You'll know where your 10s are. Years, I mean. You'll be able to long count your position in the Jubilee cycle with the moon by just knowing where the moon is, right? Because if the moon restarted every year with the sun, then you just have a yearly count. You'd never have anything but 1 year. It would restart every year, which is what the Gregorian calendar does. It keeps you stuck. It keeps you stuck in that year, right? So leave that understanding behind and understand it from the Hebraic aspect, that when you're looking up at the new, that you're not looking for an equinox, that you're looking for the first new moon of the equinox, which we had a couple days ago on around the 22nd, right? You can double check when the new moon was, the sliver, when you see it. We looked at it, we saw it. I recorded it last night and posted it, but the actual moon that I recorded last night looked a little fat to be the new moon. So we're going from the day before and starting then and then doing our count, right? So what we have is a system that decidedly uses the sun and the moon. And we have a check on this as well to say, hey, is this actually how this is supposed to go, right? Or what we're looking at in the sky corresponding to what we know about the text, right? About Exodus. Well, think about it. If your new moon starts at the beginning of, this moon, and Moses is telling you on the 14th day of that new moon, you'll slay your Passover, and we'll get ready to exodus out of Egypt. I know you've got the fire by night and then the cloud by day, but you've also got a full moon on the 14th and the 15th, right? You've got a full moon in the sky. And as you're exodusing, getting out of Egypt, right? That's what you've got. If you are on the 14th day of that moon, that's a full moon. That's a check. That is a sign, right? That's a sign. Is there another feast day that operates around the 15th of the 7th month, right? Start of Sukkot, where you're going to be outside again. It'd be kind of nice to have that full moon to get started with, to pitch your tent, right? To pitch your sukkah, right? So we have two checks in Scripture that it'd be nice to have a full moon if you're exodusing out of Egypt, or if you just happen to be building a sukkah in the wilderness, right? So we have, thank Yah, that sign of the moon in the sky to double check ourselves, to see if it be so, the way that we're interpreting the text, because you do have to make sure that you're interpreting it the right way. So, okay, there was one more additional point that I wanted to make, but what people will say is that, oh, well, how do you know that word Chodesh doesn't actually mean month or 30-day period or whatever? Well, because, Hebrew euphemisms are lived. And I use this example all the time, if you were to go to the mall and buy a copper pair of J's, let's just say you're speaking to somebody who is from Spain or from China, they doesn't know what you mean when you say copper pair of J's. But if you're speaking to somebody from the culture, or even from the United States, they're going to know that you're talking about Jordans, more than likely, right? But you have to be a part of the culture, or at least familiar with the culture, to know that, So that shorthand, that slang, is common to Hebrew culture, even today. So when you look at the sky and they say, okay, well, we're looking for the first new of the year, right? That's clearly not anything but the moon, because the moon is the thing that they're looking in the sky for, to see if it's new. People will say, oh, well, you have a word for moon, yarak, like Jericho. Yeah, you do. But if you're not looking for the whole moon, if you're looking for the new of the moon, then you would say new. And if you look for the new, every new, because that's how you mark a new moon, then that's very, very, very common in your culture, so that you would have probably slangs for it, right? That you wouldn't say the Chadash Yarak. You wouldn't have to say that, but you just say the new, right? So that's what you're dealing with. You're not dealing with a static culture. You're not dealing with a culture that doesn't have life. You're dealing with a living book, the living word. And when it's lived, it looks lived. What's understood doesn't have to be explained. The Hebrews understood that the new, that Genesis said you should be looking for in the sky, or Genesis says you should be looking for signs in the sky to keep your Moedim. And then Leviticus says at the new, then it has to be in the sky, right? Right? So then it must be the moon, because the moon is the thing that renews in the sky. So it's just simple study, right? And understanding. So these are the things that we should ask for. These are the things that we should represent. These are the things that we should know as a culture. It's important that we know them as a culture, because it's our culture and it was given to us, right? The oracles of Elohim were given to the Hebrews, right? And it's our responsibility to understand them. So just a quick recap. Leviticus 23 gives us our feast days, right? The first one that it gives us is one that we can't find with the sky. It doesn't give us an address for it in the sky. It just tells us 6 days do you work, and on the seventh day you rest. That's one that was given to us by Yah, right? And thank Yah that he gave it to us, because there would be no way that we would have it otherwise, being in slavery and captivity and thrown to the wolves, right? So the secondary method, or the first method you would have to say, is the 7-day count. The second method is the sun, where we find our new year according to the book of Enoch at the equinox. The third is the moon, where we find our new moon according to the sliver, according to equinox, and then keep our feast day count starting with that according to Leviticus 23. And then when we start that feast day count, we know that we have the three methods coming together at what feast day? Shabbatot. Because once we get started on that feast count, after unleavened bread and first fruits, the next thing that you have is Shabbatot, where you count 7 Sabbaths, right? So you've got to have the sun to start the year. You've got to have the moon to start the new cycle, the new moon cycle, to be able to start your count. But then when you get into the count, look again, you're going to have to count 7s in the middle of it. So again, unifying the entire calendrical system, Sabbath, sun, stars, and moon, into a whole system of understanding that incorporates everything, including how we worship. Okay, I think that we're good for that one. 37 minutes is still a little bit long, but this has been Theory of Everything 20, the calendar. All right, shalom, shalom.